Scientists spent 50 years staring at a pair of massive arms trying to figure out what kind of nightmare creature they belong to. But that mystery is nothing compared to the other strange creatures of prehistory that I'm going to talk about in this video. These are prehistoric creatures we cannot explain. So starting things off, we need to talk about whales with legs. Not flippers, not fins, actual functional legs that could support their body weight on dry land. 49 million years ago, this was apparently a reasonable evolutionary decision. Ambulocetus had 4 working limbs, webbed feet, and a jaw designed for underwater hearing. It could walk on land, swim in water, and probably spent most of its time lying in shallow rivers waiting for something edible to come drink. This is evolution's version of a rough draft that somehow worked perfectly. The whole setup sounds impossible and weird until you see the fossil, which is 3 meters long, built from both worlds, with eyes positioned high on its head for surface surveillance. This thing was running the crocodile playbook before our modern crocodiles perfected it. But here's what makes it really weird. Ambulocetus had already figured out underwater hearing. Modern whales use their jawbones to channel sound vibrations to their inner ears. This walking whale had the same system, which means it was listening to underwater sounds while still having perfectly functional land legs. So evolution wasn't just experimenting with amphibious mammals. It was building a sophisticated aquatic predator that happened to retain the option of walking away from bad situations, which is just smart planning, honestly. The teeth were designed for grabbing and holding struggling prey. Powerful tail could propel it through the water. The legs could carry it between rivers or onto riverbanks for better hunting positions. Ambulocetus had basically optimized itself for being everywhere its prey didn't want it to be. This worked great until the lineage decided to commit fully to aquatic life. Later, whale ancestors gradually lost their land mobility in exchange for better swimming performance. Ambulocetus represents the last moment when whales could still change their minds about the whole ocean thing. What's interesting is that the fossil record rarely preserves transitional forms this perfectly. Usually you get fragments and educated guesses, but Ambulocetus is complete enough to show exactly how one of evolution's most dramatic transformations actually happened. So yeah, that walking whale is pretty weird, but wait until you see what happened when snakes got access to a hothouse climate and basically said, "Hold my beer." So here's what happened when the dinosaurs died and Earth turned into a sauna. Scientists found some really big snake bones in a coal mine in Colombia. And when I say really big, I mean these vertebrae were the size of dinner plates. The team that probably found them thought they discovered some kind of crocodile. Turns out they'd found Titanoboa, 47 feet long, over a ton, the kind of snake that makes you wonder why evolution even bothers with being subtle anymore. But here's where it gets weird. This thing wasn't just freakishly huge for no reason. It was huge because the planet was basically a giant greenhouse. See, snakes are cold-blooded. They need heat from their environment to function, and Titanoboa needed so much heat to keep its massive body running that scientists could actually figure out how hot the Earth was 60 million years ago just by looking at the bones. Apparently, Colombia was averaging about 93 degrees back then, year-round, which is insane. That's hotter than most places get in summer today. But Titanoboa was just chilling in these swampy rivers, probably wondering why everything else was so small. We know it lived in rivers because they found its skull later. And surprise, this thing wasn't crushing mammals or wrestling crocodiles. It was eating fish. Fish, a school bus-sized snake that specialized in catching fish. Teeth were all wrong for grabbing big prey. They were loose and designed for slippery stuff that tries to wiggle away. So picture this monster just floating around like some kind of aquatic nightmare, casually gulping down prehistoric salmon while the climate slowly cooled down around it. And that's exactly what killed it. As Earth cooled off, Titanoboa couldn't maintain its body temperature anymore. Too big, too cold, too dead. Meanwhile, mammals started taking over because they could make their own heat, which was a smart move, mammals. You really dodged a bullet there. That's how we got us. The whole discovery basically forced climate scientists to rewrite their models of what the post-dinosaur world looked like. Sometimes paleontology isn't about finding cool bones. Sometimes you accidentally invent a biological thermometer. But that aquatic nightmare was still just a fish eater compared to one of the oldest water-dwelling apex predators. Quick question, what's the worst place you could possibly encounter a scorpion the size of a canoe? If you said, while you're swimming, congratulations, you understand why the Devonian period was a bad time to go fishing. Meet Jaekelopterus, 8.5 feet of pure aquatic anger. Before you ask, no, it didn't live in the ocean. This thing patrolled freshwater rivers in what is now Germany, which means some ancient salmon gentleman had a really bad day. The first clue scientists found was a claw, just one massive claw 18 inches long, sitting in some German rocks. Probably took them a while to work up the courage to dig for the rest of it, and smart move honestly. When they finally pieced together what this thing looked like, they realized they weren't dealing with your garden variety water bug. Jaekelopterus had compound eyes that could spot prey from across a river. It was lightweight, with hollow bones that let it move fast despite being enormous. And those claws weren't just there to look scary, they had specialized teeth for puncturing and gripping. See, back in the Devonian, fish were getting serious about armor. Thick plates, heavy scales, the whole defensive package. So Jaekelopterus did what any reasonable predator would do. It got bigger and bigger and bigger until it could just crush whatever armor evolution threw at it. This went on for millions of years. Fish got tougher armor, scorpions got bigger claws. Fish got thicker plates, scorpions got stronger muscles. It's a classic evolutionary arms race, except one side had 8 legs and nightmare fuel for a face. The whole system worked great until the late Devonian extinction hit. Suddenly, all those heavily armored fish disappeared, and when your entire business model is crush things with expensive armor, losing your customer base is a problem. Jaekelopterus went extinct not because it wasn't good at its job, but because it was too good at its job. It specialized itself right into a dead end. Meanwhile, smaller, more flexible predators survived just fine. The fossil record is full of these stories. Get too comfortable in your niche, and evolution will eventually pull the rug out from under you. But at least river monsters stayed in the water where they belonged, unlike the next creature we're going to talk about. When paleontologists found the first Quetzalcoatlus wing bone in Texas, they probably stared at it for a while. Then they measured it, and then they measured it again. And then they quietly started questioning their career choices. A 36-foot wingspan, a standing height of a full-grown giraffe, the largest thing that ever flew, and it lived right up until the asteroid hit. It basically spent 68 million years just casually defying physics. Now, you might be wondering how something that massive actually got off the ground. Did it run off cliffs? Did it need a really strong wind? Well, it turns out the Quetzal had a much more elegant solution. It just launched itself into the air using pure arm strength. Picture this thing crouched down on all fours, wings folded back. Then it would vault straight up 8 feet in the air, unfold those enormous wings, and just start flying. One explosive push, and it was airborne. Yeah, this thing hit the gym. Once it was up there, the Quetzal could soar for hours without flapping, just riding thermals across the Cretaceous landscape, probably looking down at all the dinosaurs, probably feeling smug about the whole situation. But here's where it gets interesting. For decades, scientists thought this thing was a scavenger, giant flying vulture picking at dead dinosaurs. It makes sense, right? Wrong. Turns out the Quetzal spent most of its time on the ground, walking around on its folded wings, hunting small animals. Yeah, it was a terrestrial stalker. This giraffe-tall flying nightmare would just walk through the plains using its long neck to snatch up anything smaller than a person. Baby dinosaurs, lizards, mammals, basically anything that couldn't outrun a 6-foot-tall beak attached to legs. The whole skim feeding idea got thrown out the window because the physics don't work. Dragging a massive beak through the water at flying speed would have been impossibly difficult. It's much easier to just stroll around being a flying death stork. The Quetzal lived in a world where being the size of a small airplane was apparently a reasonable life strategy. Then the asteroid showed up, and suddenly being giant wasn't such a great idea anymore. Timing is everything in evolution. Unfortunately for the Quetzal, its timing was terrible. But even a flying giant would look cute compared to what evolution did to birds. A high school kid in Argentina found a skull that was 28 inches long, just sitting there in some rocks. Most teenagers find old soda cans when they're looking around outside. This kid found evidence that birds used to be absolutely terrifying. The skull belonged to Kelenken, 3 meters tall, built for running, and equipped with a beak that could crack your car's windshield. This was South America during the Miocene, when mammals were supposedly taking over the world. Apparently, nobody told the birds about this. See, after the dinosaurs died, South America got cut off from the rest of the world. Mammals were doing their thing everywhere else, but South America decided to let birds handle the whole apex predator situation, and they were really good at it. Kelenken had the biggest head of any bird that ever lived. That skull was larger than some dinosaur skulls, but this wasn't just there to look scary. The beak was designed for murder. Hooked at the end, reinforced throughout, powered by massive neck muscles that could drive it down with the force of a hatchet. The hunting strategy it had was simple. Run down your prey, and this thing could run fast in those long legs, then use the beak to deliver precise, brutal strikes till whatever you were chasing stopped moving. No grappling, no wrestling, just repeated blunt trauma until the problem went away. What's really wild is the Kelenken was competing with actual mammalian predators. There were saber-toothed marsupials running around at the same time, giant bear dogs, all the usual suspects, but the bird was winning. This went on for millions of years. Terror birds just dominated South American ecosystems while the rest of the world figured out that the mammals were supposed to be in charge. Eventually, the continents reconnected and more modern predators moved south. Suddenly, terror birds were competing with cats and dogs and bears that had been perfecting their techniques for ages. The birds had gotten really good at being the only large predators around, but they hadn't been preparing for an invasion. Kelenken went extinct not because it wasn't a perfect killing machine, but because being a perfect killing machine in isolation doesn't help when the whole rulebook changes. So yeah, terror birds were scary, but as I just said, mammals had their own version of completely messed up. Evolution occasionally makes decisions that seem designed to confuse future paleontologists. Take Chalicotherium, horse head, gorilla arms, giant sloth claws, and it ate leaves. This thing walked on its knuckles to protect its claws, then used those same claws to gently pluck vegetation from trees. For decades, scientists couldn't figure out what they were looking at. They'd find horse-like teeth in one spot, massive claws in another, and the guy who first examined the claws thought he discovered a giant pangolin. Meanwhile, someone else was describing a horse with weird teeth. Nobody connected the dots. Turns out they were both looking at the same animal. Chalicotherium had committed fully to being the most contradictory creature possible. It was a hoofed mammal that didn't have hoofs, a plant eater built like a predator, and a gentle giant that looked like he'd tear you apart. The claws were the key to everything. These weren't weapons, they were tools. Chalicotherium would walk up to a tree, rear back on its high legs, and use those massive hooks to pull branches down to mouth level. It basically turned itself into a living cherry picker. This worked great for about 15 million years. Chalicotherium was perfectly adapted for its niche. It could reach food other animals couldn't get to. It could sit back on its butt and take breaks whenever it wanted, thanks to built-in sitting pads on its hip bones. Life was good for it, but there was one small problem. Chalicotherium's entire lifestyle depended on forests. Lots of trees, lots of branches to pull down, and lots of leaves to strip off. As long as the world stayed forested, everything was fine. Then the climate started cooling down. Grasslands began taking over, and forests shrank. Suddenly, Chalicotherium's highly specialized feeding strategy became a liability. You can't knuckle walk your way to success in a world without trees. The last Chalicotheres hung on until pretty recently. Some species even made it to the Pleistocene, but they were living on borrowed time. When your entire body plan is built around one specific type of environment, environmental change is your worst enemy. Chalicotherium kind of proves that being perfectly adapted isn't always a good thing. Sometimes evolution's most creative solutions become evolutionary dead ends. At the end of the day, it's not that weird. At least it had normal teeth, right? Well, our next creature could go through 500 teeth that got replaced every 14 days. That means this dinosaur was growing a new tooth somewhere in its mouth every 20 minutes for its entire life. Whoever designed this thing clearly never heard of moderation. The skull was basically a tooth factory. It was rows and rows of replacements stacked up behind each working tooth, waiting their turn. The whole setup was so focused on tooth production that the skull bones ended up paper thin. Some parts were less than 2 millimeters thick. You could probably see through them. This created an interesting engineering problem. How do you build a head that's mostly empty space but still needs to support 500 teeth? Well, this dinosaur solved this by basically giving up on everything else. No thick bone, no heavy jaw muscles, no powerful bite. Just a wide, flat mouth full of teeth. The mouth itself was completely wrong for a sauropod. Instead of a long neck reaching up to tall trees, this dinosaur kept its head pointed straight down at the ground. The whole time, its inner ear was positioned so that looking down was the natural, comfortable position. So you've got this 30-foot long dinosaur that spent its entire life staring at the dirt, using its ridiculous tooth setup to crop ground level plants. It wasn't reaching for tree branches or stripping bark. It was essentially mowing the lawn with its face. This worked perfectly for the specific environment that it lived in. The rivers of Cretaceous Africa were surrounded by soft, low-growing plants, plenty of vegetation right at ground level. Perfect for a dinosaur that had committed entirely to horizontal eating. But the whole system was incredibly fragile. Those paper-thin skull bones meant that this dinosaur couldn't handle any serious impact. It couldn't fight predators. It couldn't crash through vegetation. It couldn't even bite down very hard on its food. One wrong move and the whole delicate apparatus would collapse. The fossil record actually backs this up, because complete skulls of this dinosaur are incredibly rare because they fell apart so easily. Most of what we know comes from scattered pieces that had to be digitally reconstructed. The price of extreme specialization was extreme fragility, but 500 teeth is nothing compared to a planet plant eater with fangs. Imagine being a paleontologist and finding a tiny herbivore with vampire fangs and porcupine quills. Then imagine sticking it in a drawer for 45 years because you're too busy to deal with whatever nonsense evolution was trying to pull. That's exactly what happened to Pegomastax. This thing sat in a South African museum from the 1960s until 2012, waiting for someone to have the time to figure out why a plant eater needed fangs. Turns out the answer is gloriously stupid. Pegomastax was about the size of a house cat. It had a parrot beak for cropping vegetation, normal plant-eating teeth in the back, and then just randomly decided to throw in a pair of sharp canines right behind the beak. So apparently, regular herbivore equipment wasn't dramatic enough. The fangs weren't for eating meat. They were for being petty. When another Pegomastax got too close to its food, it would deliver a quick nip to make its point. When a predator showed up, same thing. Just enough bite to say, I'm having a bad day and you're about to make it worse. The fangs were just the beginning. The whole body was covered in long, stiff bristles that stuck out in all directions. It basically turned this tiny dinosaur into a walking punk rock album cover. The bristles made it look bigger and more intimidating than it actually was. So you've got this cat-sized, spike-covered fang vegetarian wandering around early Jurassic South Africa, probably scaring things twice its size just by existing. This is the definition of big energy in a small package. What's really funny is that the Pegomastax was actually pretty advanced for its time. Those self-sharpening back teeth were more sophisticated than what most other herbivores had. It could process tougher vegetation than its competition, and the fangs and quills were just bonus intimidation features. But tiny mysteries are nothing compared to 50 years of massive confusion. 2 arms, 8 feet long each. That's all paleontology had to work with for 50 years. Just sitting there in museums, there were these massive limbs with no body attached, driving scientists completely insane. The arms were clearly from something huge, something bipedal, something that could probably tear a car in half if it wanted to. So naturally, everyone assumed they belonged to some kind of super predator, the Mongolian T-Rex killer, death incarnate with opposable thumbs. Artists drew these incredible monsters based on nothing but arm bones, giant carnivores with massive claws, stalking the late Cretaceous like a kaiju. Museums built exhibits around the idea that these arms belonged to the ultimate theropod killing machine. Then in 2014, scientists finally found the rest of the skeleton. 2 complete skeletons actually, and it turned out everyone had been completely, hilariously wrong about everything. Dinocheirus had a duckbill, a camel hump, feathers on its tail, and it was 11 meters long, weighed 6 tons, and spent its time wading through rivers eating fish and plants. Those terrifying claws that everyone was obsessed over, yeah, they were for digging up roots and pulling down branches. The whole scientific community had spent half a century imagining the most metal dinosaur possible. Turned out to be a gentle giant that probably couldn't catch a sick gazelle if its life depended on it. Even better, one of the new skeletons had fish scales in its stomach. So not only was this thing not a super predator, it was standing around in shallow water catching fish with its bare hands. The Mongolian equivalent of a fisherman. The discovery completely changed how paleontologists think about ornithomimosaurs. Turns out the ostrich dinosaur family was way more diverse than anyone realized. Some were fast runners, and some were giant omnivores with duckbills and humps. But all of those bizarre creatures look completely normal compared to what I saved for last. Russian swamps 267 million years ago. Before dinosaurs existed, before mammals existed, something was already walking around with mammalian skin and a crown of elaborate horns, probably wondering why everything else looked so primitive. Estemmenosuchus had glandular skin, not scales and not primitive reptile hide. Actual glandular skin with specialized cells for temperature control and communication. This thing had figured out one of the key mammalian innovations before mammals were even a concept. The horns were equally ridiculous. 2 pairs of bony knobs sticking out of its skull in different directions, creating this ornate crown that served no purpose except looking impressive. This wasn't some simple brutish creature either. Estemmenosuchus lived in herds, used complex social signals, and had developed sophisticated thermoregulation strategies. It was essentially running a mammalian social system with reptile hardware, 200 million years before mammals showed up to claim credit. The whole package worked perfectly for its swampy environment. Those horns stuck up above the waterline for communication and recognition. The glandular skin helped with temperature control in fluctuating climates, and the social behavior provided protection and resource sharing. But here's what makes this truly insane. Estemmenosuchus was a therapsid, which means it was on the evolutionary line that would eventually lead to mammals. It had already invented one of the most important mammalian features, then that lineage went through multiple extinction events, survived the worst mass extinction in Earth's history, and eventually gave rise to actual mammals that we know today. So mammals didn't invent glandular skin. We just rediscovered it after our ancient relatives figured it out, lost it, and then spent 200 million years getting it back. Evolution apparently has a really long memory and doesn't mind repeating itself when it finds something that works. It's the ultimate reminder that evolution doesn't follow rules or timelines. Sometimes the most advanced features show up first, then get shelved for a few 100 million years, and then make a comeback when the conditions are right. So you have it, a bunch of creatures that prove evolution has zero chill whatsoever. I love making videos like these, so if you like these videos, make sure to let me know down in the comments below, give this video a like, and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. And if you want to watch another one of my videos, click the video on screen now.